more than sexual solicitation. Even though, again, sexual solicitation is bad, but the stats don't tell us that there's a lot of it going on, at least from this particular book. But it says that from 4 to 46% of youth reported being cyberbullied. So this is a huge problem. And they're not sure if the online or offline is similar in nature. They tend to say no, but it certainly is a problem. Okay, 9. All the stuff about cyberbullying. They talk about the characteristics of victims and what they go through. They talk about the perpetrators. They talk about the offline connections. They talk about the relationship between all this and cyberbullying and solicitation. Basically, the victims, it's horrible. I mean, it's very distressing. They have all these stats about how the victims are negatively affected, feeling frustrated, angry, sad, and they are more likely to engage in self-destructive behaviors, interpersonal violence, forms of delinquency. So it has a huge impact, and of course we've seen instances of suicide. So it's horrible stuff that we need to fight against. The perpetrators, when they talk about that, usually they are also underage, and half of the victims reported that cyberbullies were in the same grade. 44% of victims reported that the perpetrator was an offline friend. So they already know these folks. So it's, in a way, it's typical bullying that's now online and magnified through the whole internet experience. Offline connections. Basically, one of the things it talks about is victims and perpetrators often are the same people, because you can sort of go back. What was it called? These are bully victims. Cyberbullying back is as a practice here. Basically, between 3 and 12% of youths have been found to be both victims and perpetrators of online harassment. Basically, they say the whole connection between online and offline harassment is complex. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they don't. So basically, there's still some dangers, and they talk about the very last thing that talked about how, for example, those bullied outside of school, that is not offline but online, were 4 more times likely to carry a weapon to school. Youths who experienced cyberbullying were more likely to report alcohol. So that bullied outside of school, I guess that means face-to-face, were 4 more times more likely to carry a weapon. And youths who experienced cyberbullying were more likely to report alcohol and drug abuse, cheating at school, truancy, assaulting others, damaging property, and carrying a weapon. So again, there is some connection there, but there's also some differences. So there is some overlap. So then, what puts kids at risk? The youth or youths at risk. And this moves on to page 377. I'm on slide 11 now. Risk factors. I like this idea. Well, I don't like this idea, but David Finkelhor proposed the theory of poly-victimization that describes how certain youths are victimized in multiple ways by different parties in environmental situations, making them a vulnerable group for harm online and offline. And this is what's important. Several non-technical means to combat sexual solicitation and harassment have been identified, particularly a strong home environment and family life. That's important. But basically, it's folks, the risk factors, it's not just being online. It's more complicated than that. They talk about the demographics of folks who are oftentimes at risk for solicitation or cyberbullying. Sometimes it all sort of depends, but sometimes it's youth questioning their own sexuality and trying to find information. Oftentimes as kids that are aged 13 through 17, race doesn't seem to be a factor. They don't get into a lot of other stuff. I would bet that there's a big difference between socioeconomic situations, where regionality, rural versus city. I mean, there's a lot of things out there, I would guess, but a lot of the research simply, I guess, has not been done. They talk about online contact with strangers, and they don't say a lot here. It's just we don't know a whole lot. Though there is a correlation. Remember what correlation means, right? There is a correlation between youths who talk with strangers about sexual topics and those who are victimized. Well, obviously, I would think that would be the case. But that's merely correlational. So in other words, we can't say that just because folks talk to strangers online that puts them in a risk, that's a risk factor, or that puts them in a risk category. We're just not sure there. Same thing with the whole idea of sharing personal information. One would think that would put you at more of a risk, but they say that's not necessarily the case. So the sharing of personal information, they say, by itself does not appear to be a significant risk factor. And they talk about some gender differences there, talking about males were found to be more frequently post personal information, while females posted more images. More males were also found to have public profiles, while females were more likely to have private profiles. This again signals that the friends of youth may indeed be the same people later harassing them or using their accounts for nefarious purposes. So, but we can't say just because somebody puts too much personal information out there that automatically becomes a risk factor. Again, it's much more complex and nuanced than that, though it could be part of it, right? They talk about depression, physical abuse, and substance abuse, and that seems to be a risk factor. So folks, kids who are already depressed, are being physically abused, have some sort of substance abuse. All that correlates with risky behavior generally that might lead to poor choices with respect to online activities. So all these things put kids at risk for online solicitation or cyberbullying, it says. And it talks about, risk for online harassment was particularly pronounced among depressed male youths who are 8 times more likely to be victimized than non-depressed male youths. Suicidal ideation has also been significantly correlated with online harassment victimization among adolescents. So there's so much information here. So in other words, another line of defense, and we don't do this very well at all in our society, it's not just family and the home environment. It's also treating kids who have mental problems, mental illnesses, mental diseases, making sure we figure out finding out early that they suffer and getting them the treatment that they need. That's something that we really, sometimes mental illness is a taboo subject, but it's a big risk factor with this, and we need to do something about it. And then they talk about the home environment, and it makes perfect sense. It says the vast majority of parents are concerned about, obviously. And a warm and communicative parent-child relationship is the most important non-technical means the parents can use to deal with the challenges of the sexualized media environment. So basically, talk to your kids. Don't ignore them. And also it says low parental monitoring, that is, folks who don't watch their kids too much, it was correlated with a host of negative offline consequences, such as increased likelihood of violence over time, police contact, and traditional offline bullying. So it gives you some ideas here about how to help kids, talk about certain parenting styles, being more safety conscious, which is all the stuff that I put on these. It's similar to the stuff that I've put on these extra links for you. And then they talk about privacy setting and blocking are those risk factors, and basically it says that people, if they are harassed, they tend to set their privacy settings stronger and block. But again, we don't know really if that truly does anything, because again, remember, most of the solicitation, most of the harassment or cyberbullying comes from people you already know and think you're friends with. It's not the strangers out there, so we tend to not block our friends. But the jury's still out on that, I think. More research needs to be done. And then, what are the types of CMC used for solicitation and or cyberbullying? I'm on page, or slide 12, and this section starts on the bottom of page 381. Basically says mostly chat rooms and instant messaging tend to be where most of this stuff actually happens. The last paragraph in that little section is important. Several explanations exist for why chat and instant messaging are particularly prevalent in harassment and solicitation. Synchronous, that is, in time, media may be particularly effective to get immediate feedback on if a youth is interested in a sexual topic or irritate a target through a constant stream of messages. In addition to being popular, these technologies are used by youth for locating partners and general socialization. Youths who have a poor home environment or engage in other risky behaviors are more likely to use online chat frequently, and chat room use is correlated with increased depression, suggesting chat could be a particularly attractive mode of communication for youths who are not getting the emotional support they need. So again, perhaps goes back to the home environment. Blogging. Not a whole lot of sexual solicitation happens through blogging. There could be some harassment. They say, so far as social networking sites like Facebook, again, the jury's sort of inconclusive, or jury's still out. The research is not conclusive here about how Facebook sort of how it relates to all this. I thought the last paragraph on page 383 was important, and the last few sentences here. Several troubling areas arise on social networking sites, again, like Facebook, such as how the greatest exposure of children and adolescents to sex crimes is at the hands of people who are already part of their families and social networks. Much more research is needed in this area to provide a complete picture of how this technology is being adopted and used by youth, particularly in the context of sexualized communication. But again, the greatest exposure of children and adolescents to sex crimes is at the hands of people who are already a part of their families and social networks. So it's not like strangers are out there doing it. Sure, there are cases, but for the most part, it's people they already know. Gaming. Gaming is very important. There can be a lot of harassment on gaming. And remember when we talked about gaming and gender issues from the last time, gaming is also rhetoric. And it is gendered, and it sustains in a lot of ways patriarchy. Right, Finn? And they talked about this idea of griefing and in gaming. Half of game-playing teens report seeing or hearing people being hateful, racist, or sexist while playing. 63 reported people being mean and overly aggressive. And gaming is particularly violent kind of gaming is very, very problematic. And it's not just because of solicitation and cyberbullying. It's bigger than that, because particularly when it comes to gender. and just sort of naturalizing the very idea of violence in our society. Like, it's cool, yeah, which is crap. So gaming is important here.